Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Show. My name is Javier Soriano, and today is a special day because we don't have a regular host and guest kind of interview. I have with me my colleague Ian, and we're going to be just talking about frequently asked questions. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Javier, first of all, thank you for welcoming me along today. My name's Ian Parramore. I'm one of Javier's colleagues. So nice to meet everyone. As Javier mentioned, today we want to get into a little bit of the FAQs, the things we hear most often from our customers, from our colleagues in the field, and I'm sure questions that a lot of you have to ask us as well around Sentinel Data Lake.
Let's do it. So, first question, just to clarify for everyone, what do I need and how do I onboard Sentinel Data Lake into my environment?
That's a fantastic question. And first of all, Data Lake is a turn on and configure solution. So it's intended to be super easy, but there are some prereqs you need to fulfill. So first of all, you do need to make sure that your Sentinel workspaces are connected to the integrated Defender portal. So that's really the primary prerequisite you need. Once you've done that, you should see a banner within your portal if you're in a supported region for Sentinel Data Lake, inviting you to onboard, or you can go to the Sentinel configuration tab on the left-hand blade of the Defender portal and start the onboarding from there. You do need to fulfill some permission requirements. So to turn on Lake, you do need to either be a global admin or a security admin. And because we're onboarding resources to a selected Azure subscription, you do need to be the subscription owner for the subscription that you're going to use to onboard Lake to.
Got it. So I have to have my workspace connected to the Defender portal, first of all. And then I have to have permissions, like you mentioned, security admin, global admin, and the Azure subscription owner to be able to execute the onboarding operation, basically.
100% correct. There's one other gotcha to watch out for. You may optionally have an Azure policy in your environment that tells you which resources you're allowed to onboard to a subscription. This is a little bit of a gotcha. We had a number of customers trip up on this. So you do need to have the Sentinel Data Lake resource allowed in that Azure policy if you are using a policy to allow list resources that can be configured and provisioned into the subscription. That's all in our docs. So please go take a look at our docs for the details on the specific resource type.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that one. Super clear. What about regions? Do we support all the different regions of the workspaces that I have connected to Defender? Only the primary one? How does that work?
Oh, no, that's another great question. So let me talk you through a little bit about workspace selection. So once you've got those workspaces connected into the Defender portal, the next thing to check is whether Lake's supported in your region. If Lake's supported in your region, once you go to onboard, we're going to look at the primary workspace that's connected to Defender and look at the Azure region that workspace is in. And again, as long as that's a Lake-supported region, we're going to onboard that primary workspace to Lake, as well as all of the other Sentinel workspaces that are Defender connected within that region. So you can absolutely support multiple workspaces as long as they're within the same region as the primary workspace.
Got it. Understood. So that means that if I have other workspaces connected to Defender that are not in the same region as the primary, those will not be onboarded to the data lake, right?
That's correct. It's a really good question. So today we do only support Lake within that single region. If you do have workspaces that are in other regions, then you're correct. They won't be eligible for being onboarded to Lake. That multi-region workspace support is on the roadmap. We don't have an ETA to share at the moment, but it is something that we're working towards and is in our kind of forward plans.
Fantastic.
So over the question for you, Javier.
Tell me.
Now we've got Lake up and running. What are the things I should go and look at next? What are the first things I should start to do now I've onboarded to Lake?
Okay, great question, Ian. So the first thing that I would do is use one experience that we have in the Defender portal, which is called SOC optimization, right? In this experience, you will find a series of recommendations on which tables are the best candidates for you to move to the data lake. So you will see here in the screen an example of a table, specifically AD service principal sign-in logs, that, as you can see in the section highlighted in yellow, didn't have any queries or rules running on top of that table. Therefore, I'm not really using that table that much. And the system is recommending me to move that data into a different tier, specifically the data lake, right? As you can see there is marked that there's a button to go directly to table management. So you can switch that table to the data lake tier and therefore pay less for that specific data ingestion. So that's the first thing that I would do, right? Go to this SOC optimization experience and then just look at the recommendations that we're giving you and act on them if you think it's necessary. The second one is that, as you probably know, in all the SIEM environments, there's a specific data sources that are very high volume and not so high security value, right? Things like firewall logs, proxy logs, and things like that, that are super verbose, right? Still, they have security value, and I want to be able to have visibility to them, but not spending a big part of my budget going into the hot tier of Sentinel, right? So for those, we encourage customers to see if for their environment it makes sense to move them to the data lake. We actually published recently a blog post that is explaining a specific use case that we think is very valuable. The thing is, hey, I have that firewall log that is going directly into the data lake tier to save some money. It's very large ingestion, so we want to put that in that tier. But at the same time, I want to create an IOC matching rule that basically detects indicators of compromise in those firewall logs. That runs basically as a KQL job. I have a KQL job that is running periodically on that data lake tier, doing correlation of my firewall logs against my TI table, the table where I have my indicators of compromise. If there is any findings, if there is any matches between those firewall logs, I will rehydrate just that IOC, just that specific record into the analytics tier so I can run a detection and it's visible for the analyst to investigate on it, right? So again, take a look at this blog post that we published where we explain the whole scenario, firewall logs, TI matching rules, the scheduling that you need to do, and so on and so forth. So those, I think, are quick wins that you can basically benefit from just after you onboard into Data Lake.
That's fantastic. I love the idea of saving money, and I think that'll resonate with a whole bunch of other people as well. So could I move all of my data into Data Lake? I mean, it sounds like a great idea.
Probably you should not, right? So there's several things that are important to keep in analytics. What things? First of all, things that require near real-time detection, right? So if you have data sources that are things like, EDR logs, that are signing logs from your identity provider, and things like that, those are very important for real-time detections. Those should be kept in the analytics tier. There's other features as well that are used in the analytics tier. For example, our user entity behavior analytics engine that needs the data to be in the analytics tier, right? So it's important to see what are the different data sources supported by this UEBA engine. And then probably if you want to keep those specific data sources also in the analytics tier, right? There's other things that require the logs to be in analytics, like for example, our workbooks. So if you have workbooks that need to read data from a specific table, it's better to keep that in the analytics tier as well.
Okay, that makes sense. So message, don't get too carried away. Use Data Lake tier for those high volume, lower value logs, but also look at SOC optimization to get some steer on which logs might be suitable to move to Lake. So that's great. That's super clear. So thank you, Javier. So if I want to move data into the lake, what do I have to do from a data ingestion perspective? It sounds like that might be quite complicated, right?
Actually, one of the great benefits of the data lake and the integration within the whole experience is that I don't have to change anything on data ingestion. I don't have to change my APIs. I don't have to change my connectors. I can use the same ingestion methods that I was using before. If I use Azure Monitor Agent, I can keep using that. If I have my codeless connectors, I can keep using that. If I have my Logstash plugin, I can keep using that. So I don't have to change anything. And actually, you will see here in the slide, our table management experience, right? That allows you to switch a table from one tier to another, and that's it, right? You click the save button, the apply button, the data will start flowing into the new tier through the same mechanism that you used to ingest it into the other tier. So very seamless ingestion switch. All the parsing that was done as part of the original ingestion will continue to happen in the data lake. So it's very, very seamless, very well integrated.
Awesome. And if I'm right, anything that goes to the analytics tier gets mirrored to the lake as well. And it looks like I've got a great way to control my retention options as well.
Correct. You can, in table management, you can set specifically what is the retention in the hot tier into the analytics tier and what is the total retention in the lake.
Awesome. So I had another question because this all sounds great. I've been looking at bringing my Defender logs into Sentinel because I'd like to keep those logs for greater than 30 days, but they're very high volume. So I've been struggling with how to think about that in terms of the lake and in terms of that long-term retention. So how should I be thinking about that kind of problem space?
So yeah, and I think that this of the whole session that we're going to do today is probably the most frequently asked questions among all of them, right? So indeed, XDR data, as you know, XDR advanced hunting tables, they're only kept in the Defender portal, available for 30 days by default, right? Up to now, if I wanted to extend the retention of those tables beyond those 30 days, I had to send the data to the analytics tier, and therefore with the cost that comes with that, right? So this week at Ignite, we announced that we are now going to support direct ingestion from XDR into the data lake without having to go through the analytics tier. That, of course, means great cost saving while allowing you to keep interactive access to those XDR tables for as long as you want, even up to 12 years, right? So we announced again at Ignite the Defender for Endpoint tables support immediately. So you will be able to see that quite soon. And MDA, Defender for Cloud Apps, and MDO, Defender for Office tables will become available quite soon as well.
This is awesome. Thank you, Javier. I had one last question on ingestion. So I've got some log sources which I really need some of that data to go into the analytics tier. But there's probably like 90% of it that I just want to put directly into Lake. So is there a way I should be thinking about that?
Good question, Ian. Indeed. So right now in the table management experience, as you saw, you can switch the whole table either to one tier or the other. But what about that use case where I have some records that I want them to still go into analytics tier to trigger detections, for example, but there's other records where the high volume of data, I still want it to be going into the data lake. So that's possible, right? So you see here in the screen an example of how that's done. You see the ingestion pipeline, the clients on the left, direct ingestion via API or agents, the ingestion pipeline with transformations via the data collection rule, as you probably know. And then within that data collection rule, I split the data stream in two different paths, right? The path at the top goes to the native table, the syslog table in this case. And then we have another table that we have created that is the syslog_cl table that is in the data lake tier. In order to enable this scenario, right now you have to do the changes in the data collection rule. So the first step that you need to perform is that you need to create a custom log table with the same schema as the original table. In our example, it was syslog, so syslog_cl with the same schema. This is not very complicated, but in any case, we have there a script. We'll provide here the link that allows you to create that custom log table just with a simple command, right? And then I have to modify the data collection rule, as you see in the screen, two data flows, right? The first data flow, as you see there, that goes into the analytics tier with a specific transformation KQL, and then another data flow that goes into the data lake tier with the opposite KQL, right? The opposite transformation. In this case, all the device actions that are equals to allow will go into the analytics tier. The ones that are not allowed will go into data lake. So this is how it's done today. We are planning in the near future to offer that natively in the portal without having to manage the data collection rule.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Javier. I have one further question for you around data. So at the moment, I'm using Sentinel archive tier for longer term retention of my data. What's going to happen to that data? How should I think about that when I move to Lake? And what's it going to cost me? Are there any updates there?
Cool. Good question. So first of all, the moment you enable the data lake, what happens is that we are changing the billing meter. So the billing meter that was used to charge you for the archive storage is moving to a new data lake storage billing meter. Okay. The data that was in archive, it stays there. It's not going anywhere. You can still search it via the same experience that you had before. Search jobs. The data that goes that is ingested into the data lake after you onboard into data lake will be in the data lake, and therefore it will be accessible through the different methods that we have, interactive queries, KQL jobs, and so forth. The second important thing to mention here is that new billing meter that I mentioned, it has changed completely how we calculate how much do we charge customers. How it has changed? Now we charge based on compressed data. In the archive world, we charged on uncompressed data, but now we charge on compressed data. And we assume a 6:1 compression ratio across the board. So Just for an example, imagine that you have 600 gigabytes of data in your data lake or in your archive tier. We're going to charge you only for 100. So basically, we're dividing the bill, the storage bill, by 6.
Wow. That sounds fantastic. I'm really pleased you called that out because that's going to be an important cost saving for our customers and our partners as well.
Perfect, Ian. So now a question from me to you. So we have already the data in the data lake, right? We're all happy about that. What do I do to query the data in the data lake? So what permissions do I need? What are the different interfaces that I can use?
So first of all, I think it's really important to understand, and this kind of comes back to the last question around archive as well, that the lake is a fully interactive data store. So you can query that using our native Lake Explorer capability, using normal KQL. You can use Spark notebooks to interface with the data in the lake, and you can run both of those either interactively or as scheduled jobs. But I think your question was around what rights do you need in order to do that? So at the moment with Lake, we do support some of the common global entry roles, first of all. So we support global administrator, security admin, security reader, global reader roles. So that's one way of getting started with querying the data in the Lake. The other way of permissioning data in the Lake is using workspace level Azure RBAC permissions. So using roles like log analytics reader, log analytics contributor, Sentinel reader, Sentinel contributor, and permissioning at a workspace level is the other way of allowing access to data in the lake today. Now that allows you to granulate and provide access at a workspace level. More granular forms of RBAC are currently being worked on. It's in roadmap, so keep a watch out on things over the coming months. And as we move forward, you'll see more and more capabilities around data permissioning to allow us to move to more granular modalities.
Perfect. Sounds great, Ian. So another very frequently asked question. So I was working in Sentinel before the data lake. I was using summary rules in order to extract valuable information from different tiers. And now I have KQL jobs in the data lake, right? So when do I use one versus the other? Are there differences between the two? Are the use cases that are better for one or for the other?
Another fantastic question. There are a number of differences, and I think the most important, the way to kind of frame this up is that KQL jobs really have very few limitations. You may be familiar with or used to using things like summary rules and search jobs. So summary rules and search jobs have some inherent limitations around look back periods, around the types of KQL you can run, the table joins you can use, the number of records you can return, and the timeouts that you have. So generally speaking, you want to be thinking about starting to transition summary rules and search job use cases into KQL jobs. Now, we did a lot of work around KQL job frequency as part of our GA release. You can now schedule KQL jobs down to 5-minute intervals. It gives you fully flexible KQL, multi-table joins, cross-workspace queries. You can do lookbacks up to 12 years, and our timeouts are very generous with a 1-hour timeout. So really, the framing should be anything you were doing previously in summary rules and search jobs, you should be looking at transitioning that to KQL jobs. Again, in the spirit of that turn on and configure capability, it's super easy to write job output back up to the analytics tier. So have a play around with that, familiarize yourself with it. Let me know any follow-up questions about that's really the place that you want to be going.
Fantastic. Thanks. One additional question that I had related to queries and KQL jobs. How do we audit that the different queries that I execute or the jobs that I execute? Are they audited somewhere that I can look up?
That's a fantastic question. And you'll probably be familiar with the LA query table in log analytics, where you can go and query log analytics queries. We're not using that. That would be maybe nice, but we do log to a slightly different place. So it is really important to understand. We log to the unified audit log. So we go into the Purview audit log, and we do have an interface into that in the Defender portal down in the bottom left-hand corner. But if you're connected with Microsoft Defender for Apps to M365, and would recommend you do that, and that pulls through the unified audit log into the Defender Cloud App Events table. So all of our Lake audit events will go into the Purview audit log, and through Defender for Apps land in the Cloud Event App Events table. That now then gives you the ability to query anything within there. You could even start writing alerts. So if I see that Javier is querying some super secret table that maybe he shouldn't be looking at, or he's running a huge amount of queries in a day, I can start running queries against my queries and start raising alerts if I want to off the back of that. And we're just given an example on the screen here, looking at KQL query completed. So that's the audit event will log for each KQL query that's run against the lake. Here we're showing the user who's run that and just showing you that you can get right the way down to the specific details of the KQL query that's run as well. And as we light up the Defender to Lake capabilities, you'll be able to bring that Cloud App Events table directly into the lake as well.
Excellent. And we'll put here in the screen also the link that explains all the different event types or the different audit records that we create from KQL core execution and KQL jobs as well. So you have that as a reference.
Okay, so hopefully that answers some of the questions there, Javier. I've got another question for you, though. So we've covered a lot today in terms of the questions around getting the lake set up, in terms of permissions, how to interact with the lake, and maybe how to start thinking about operationalizing lake as well. And now we've covered those kind of basics, what else should I be thinking about in terms of exploring the lake?
Perfect. So we've been covering today pretty much Sentinel data lake topics, but as you know, the Sentinel platform is much more than that, right? So we announced also September 30th, we announced the Sentinel Graph capability and the Sentinel MCP server, right? So Sentinel Graph basically gives you a bunch of experiences in the Defender portal and the Purview portal that are enabled by graphs, right? So we're going to do an episode, a very deep dive on that topic of graph. So I won't tell you more about it, but stay tuned here in the channel for the next episode where we will explain much more about that. The other capability that is also amazing is the Sentinel MCP server. So Sentinel MCP server basically allows you to utilize your agentic workloads and query the data that is in the data lake in a super easy way, right? So right now there's multiple experiences that are available. You can do it through GitHub Copilot. You can do it through Security Copilot, but also we just announced at Ignite a couple of more integrations via AI Foundry and also via Copilot Studio, right? So to build your agents and being able to utilize the intelligence and the data that is in the data lake to extract valuable insights for your SOC. I've seen it in action. Again, we're going to have also a deep dive session here in the show about the Sentinel MCP server, but it's really, really cool.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to be tuning in for those, so I'm going to look forward to those, and I'll start to have a play around with those graph and those MCP capabilities ahead of that. So I'm coming with hopefully a little bit of knowledge into those. So, hey, I think that's everything I had on my question list. So let's just summarize. What should I be taking away with me in terms of homework and go-dos off the back of the conversation today?
Perfect. So first important point that we have to focus on is connecting your Sentinel workspace to Defender, right? Without this, you cannot enable the data lake, right? Once you have that workspace or workspaces connected to Defender, you're in a good position to enable the data lake, get that benefit that we mentioned about the compression in archive, super important. It's going to save some money for our customers and partners. So those are the first two steps, right? Connect your workspace and enable the data lake. We talked about optimization, right? Like those specific tables, data sources that are not being utilized in my analytics tier. Why don't you just go into SOC optimization screen, get those recommendations, and then switch them to the lake if you consider that necessary, right? Specific data sources that you might have that are very verbose, that you're not currently utilizing in analytics tier, in detections and so on, you can move them to the data lake. Again, you probably remember one of the questions was about that scenario of TI matching for firewall logs. That's a typical super good scenario and use case for the data lake, right? Of course, start using interactive queries in the lake to just interactively navigate through the data, as well as KQL jobs, right? I'm not sure if we mentioned it, but KQL jobs support full KQL. You can do joins, you can do summarizations, whatever it is that you want. It's supported in the data lake. And they also support now very fast, very frequent scheduling. So every 10, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, you can run your KQL job to refresh that specific table with results. Super important. And then, of course, start exploring a bit the MCP and graph capabilities. As I said, we will do an episode for each of these two. But if you want, please start playing with those, so you have even more questions for us when we come back with those episodes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Javier. Thanks for inviting me along. I've got a bit of work to go do myself. Hopefully that's been useful for everybody. We've tried to cover off a lot of those common questions that we get asked from our customers and some of our colleagues as well across Microsoft. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the invite, Javier. And I'll see you next time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ia, for coming. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.